Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar session. My name's Daisy Charlton. I'm a Learning and Development Manager at the British High Commission here in Singapore, but the reason I'm chairing this meeting today is in my role as a member of BritCham's Leadership Talent Development Committee. So at the committee we try and organise events, content and insights for our members around the subject of leadership and talent development. So at the moment we're looking a lot at leadership and what that means in the agile and complex environments that we're finding ourselves in today. We've been looking at things about how to motivate and engage teams during COVID, and also recruiting, retaining and developing talent. But today's event, where does that come from? So we're the British Chamber of Commerce. We're a very diverse organisation. We have our members and other people that come along to our events, but there's one thing that most of them have in common, and that is that we're all bridging somewhere, somehow, we're bridging the worlds of the East and the West. So what we want to look at today is how do you lead organisations who are trying to bridge those two worlds? Are they two worlds, or do they have a lot more in common? What more can we learn from each other? But today we particularly wanted to focus on what we can learn from Asia, APAC and the East more generally. So the best way to learn is from experience and the stories of others. So our speakers today are going to be sharing some of their thoughts on this topic with us. Firstly, we have Vijayan Munusamy. He's the Head of Research and Content Development at the Human Capital Leadership Institute, HCLI. Secondly, we'll be hearing from Ivan Liu, who's the Executive Director at Shore Investment in APAC. And then last but not least, we'll be hearing from Dessi Berhane Silassie, APAC General Counsel, Global Head of IP Legal and Managing Director at IHS Markit. We want today to be as interactive as possible. This is very much about the human and the business stories here in Asia Pacific. So please do make sure that you are asking questions throughout the session. And my colleague Michael, who is Regional Managing Director at Coventry University and a fellow LTPD committee member, will be looking into those questions and making sure that I ask them at the end of the session wherever possible. That's all really from me. Over to our first speaker, who is Vijay. Thanks very much all.
Thank you, Daisy. The Human Capital Leadership Institute has been in existence for the past 10 years. In fact, we are celebrating the 10th anniversary this year. And the reason this institute was set up with the partnership of Ministry of Manpower, the Economic Development Board, and at that time, the Singapore Management University, is actually to study about global leadership. So what we do, we study about global leaders in Asia. We develop leaders in Asia to take up regional and global roles, and we facilitate global leadership development initiatives in organizations. So this topic is very close to our heart. And in the last 10 years, we have interviewed, had conversations with many business leaders, CEOs, HR practitioners, and employees themselves. And what we have learned is that there are 4 important human capital realities that all leaders in Asia face. These 4 realities also applicable in other parts of the region, but they are quite unique in Asia. And these 4 realities briefly, one is managing dilemmas. Is it short-term? Is it long-term in Asia? Is it standardization or localization? That's number 1. Number 2 is disruption. Now, COVID-19 is a very good example of disruption. Number 3 is about employing best practices itself can be a bias. And the reason is a lot of practices are coming out from other parts of the world, and it sometimes enriches what we are doing in Asia. But there is a lack of Asia's contribution to global leadership. So we want to look at that, and I will share some of the insights that we have learned in the last 10 years. And the fourth one, which is applicable all over the world, and what we call dissonance. Dissonance that employees face due to digital transformation, due to demographic shifts, and due to the discontinuation of many business models. So these are the realities that leaders in Asia facing more and more, and the COVID-19 has accelerated this even further. So let me share why the perspectives of Asia in terms of global leadership is critical. This is a quote from Professor Kishore Mahbubani. So what we are trying to do is we are trying not only to reach existing Western thinking, Western paradigm, because that is very helpful for global leadership development, but we also would like to make new and valuable contributions to global leadership development through research and also leadership development programs. And that is what we do at HCLI. What I'm going to be sharing in the next 10 minutes or so are based on our recent research, as well as what we know in the last 10 years. We launched this research called Human Capital Prisms last November. Why prisms? I'll inform that briefly later, the next two slides. Before that, I would like all of you to take up a quick poll. The QR code is there, but there's a link also in the chat function, and there is also a short URL. Please take this poll and we will see what other responses are. So I see responses are coming. And the question is, what leadership capability is most needed in Asia today? So let's take another 30 to 45 seconds. So I see mindset, which relates to paradigm, authenticity, relationship, inspiration, humility, communication, of course, global, purpose. Now, this is a hot topic in the current era as well. We have learned from many C-level leaders the importance of purpose. Listening is part of communication. Building, developing, and so on. So I'll keep this poll open, so you can reply as many as words that you like to, and we will revisit this at the end of the presentation as well. Now I'd like to move to the next slide. So these are the capabilities that all of you feel it's important for leaders in Asia to be successful. Inspiration and listening comes at the top. A lot of things. Resilience is part of it, flexibility. Now, what we have learned at HCLI for the last 10 years. Number one, skills and behaviors, competencies, knowledge. But attitudes and mindsets also are very critical. But what we also learned is actually equipping leaders in Asia with simple tools, with simple frameworks that they can apply in their organization to harness their global leadership initiatives as well. Now, what are those simple tools? So what I'm going to share is a combination of all this. Now, when we did the human capital PRISM research, we didn't think about the title PRISM. But when we were doing that, we were asking ourselves what leaders need most. And all of this came about. And we wanted a word that captures all of this. We wanted to use the word principles, but it doesn't sound right. We wanted to use the word lens. It doesn't sound right. The prisms came as a nice way as an analogy because prisms has 7 colors and we have identified 4 of those. The remaining 3 is up to for all of you to discover yourself in your organization because leadership is very contextual. But what I'm going to share is the 4 prisms that we have covered. So prism number 1 is ambidexterity. Number 2 is agility. Third, appreciative inquiry. And fourth is authenticity. But before we go that, there are a few things that really surprised us in this research. Number 1, we have heard a lot that human capital is a primary competitive advantage for any organization. While we are not denying that fact that human capital is very critical for any organization, we ourselves is Human Capital Leadership Institute. But what we realize is there is something more important than human capital, but it's related to it. And that is human capital practices. And the reason is human capital can walk away at any time, but human capital practices is very difficult to be nurtured, to be cultivated, to be part of the organizational DNA. So the focus should be how can we have progressive human capital practices in organization? Because even if a talent walks out, there will be other talent coming in. So it's very critical. Number 2, in the word cloud, we saw responses flexibility. And closely associated to that is agility. And we have heard enough. People say need to be agile and so on. But what we have learned is that there's a limit for agility. How much we can push our employees, our co-workers to be nimble, responsive, and agile. That is a limit for it. What we found is that more than leaders being agile, and that is given, is that can we have practices that are actually agile? And I will share some of those examples as well. Number 3, subscribing to best practices is a lousy strategy. And the reasons is simple. If organizations are subscribing to best practices, then you become one of them. And then the question is, what is your competitive advantage or what is your next advantage? Number 4 is we know leaders need to be authentic. That is given before, now, and the future. But what we found is even authentic leaders can fall into the trap of inauthentic practices. And I will share some of those as well. As I mentioned, the prism 1 is about ambidexterity. And this is related to dilemmas. So rather than saying binary, 0 and 1, yes or no, can leaders in Asia build the capability to be ambidextrous? So rather than saying short-term and long-term, the question is actually about business sustainability because you need both. And you can think many of other examples that you have faced in your organization, in your career as well. But the skill or the capability of ambidexterity is becoming more and more important. It's an old concept, but it's much relevant in today's world. The second prism is agility. Now here, we're not talking about leaders being agile. That is given. But what we're talking is, can leaders nurture agile practices? For example, HR is always implementing new initiatives and so on. Rather than HR thinking about a final product rollout, can they roll out in a similar fashion like how Google, Facebook, Amazon do? That is beta version. And it is okay to be imperfect. But it's more important to be timely than waiting until the final perfect product and then it rolls out, sometimes it fails. So as a human capital practitioners, as a leaders, we need to think about how to have the agile practices in place. The example that we like very much is the exit interview. Now, in the era where job mobility is very high, shouldn't we think interviews as transit interviews? That means your potentials, your good talents may leave, but they also may come back. Let me ask you, how many of you have received a birthday card from your previous organization after you left the organization? I suspect none of us. But why is it when you're working in the organization, you are reminded about your birthday, but not after that? Something to think about it. So these are some examples of agile practices, and that is key. So the key for business leaders in Asia is how can they develop these practices? How can they encourage, motivate their team to develop these kind of practices? Number third is in terms of data bias. Now, where the frameworks come from, where insights comes from, they comes from data. But we need to scrutinize where this data comes from. And most often is from leaders like us. Because we go to workshop, we attend webinars, and we are the privileged group to do that. But we are missing a very important component of employee voice in whatever that we do. Of course, we do employee engagement survey or employee opinion survey, but that's all. There's a lot of wisdoms in employee that need to be tackled that could not be done many years ago. But now with the technology, we can do that quite easily. And that's the reason why I administered the word cloud just now. It's easy. People are engaged, people know their responses are being displayed, and then you can have a conversations. So the power of data lies at every level of organizations, not only at the C level. Now, the other part of data bias is why are we so obsessed with gaps? If you see any kind of surveys by consulting firms, it's always about gaps. Need to move from point A to point B. But what we are missing is we are missing the strengths that organizations have. Something to think about. And what's next option if we are not leveraging best practices? And that is, we learned that organizations need to think in terms of possibilities and probabilities. In a very similar way, how finance industry thinks about risk, actuarial industry thinks about risk. Ivan is from investment. I'm sure he thinks about risk, probabilities, statistics. And the question is, why can't leaders think about human capital practices in terms of probabilities? Any kind of new initiative, there will be people who are abusing them. But how many of them? If it is only 5%, that is okay. But the response from the organization will be, oh, we have not done that before. People will abuse it. But the question is, yes, that is given. That is part of our business model. So how can we build these appreciative inquiry capabilities within the leaders? It's very critical for global leadership. And finally, authenticity. Now, authenticity here, we are not talking about leaders being authentic. That is given. But what we're talking about here, can we have authentic practices to reduce the dissonance? Dissonance due to changing work, changing workforce, and changing workplace. We identified DICE, Development, Inclusion, Communication, Engagement, as critical elements of engaging workforce in this era. And these practices need to be authentic. I'll just give you a quick example before I share the key takeaways, and then I'll pass it to Daisy back. And that is an example of, for example, what is authentic practice? I think a lot of organizations are doing great work. They have great practices, good practices, but are they authentic enough? Can they move the needle a little bit further? I'll give you a quick example. Most organizations have, for example, health benefit reimbursement, let's say $1,000. Let's say myself, Vijay, I'm going to my checkup and the checkup costs $500. So I still have balance $500. I go back to my organization. I said, hey, my health checkup is okay. I spent $500, but my doctor advised me to do more exercise. So I went back to my HR and asked, hey, I have this 500. Can I use this for my gym membership? Some organizations will say yes, because they have this flex band. They say, okay. But many of other organizations will say, no. This is only for your medical checkup. You cannot use for your gym membership. But if you think about the authenticity of that practice, What is the reason for health benefit? To keep employees healthy. So what is wrong, Vijay, using the 500 for gym membership? He's not using for leisure or travel or something else. So this is something to think about. So we can think about authentic practice in every domain of human capital practices in your organization. So I'd like to wrap up with these 4 key takeaways. Leaders need to reshape and reframe problems as dilemmas to be managed, rather than saying either or. They need to speed up and sync human capital practices with rapidly changing environment. Agile itself not enough. They need to have agile practices that is co-evolving with the challenges. Third, adopt a positive outlook. Look at the positive. What are the strengths that employees bring? What are the strengths of the organization? Can that be leveraged to compensate some of the weakness, some of the gaps? And fourth, tilt towards championing the human part of human capital. So thank you very much. I welcome your questions. We can go through that later, but thank you very much. Over to you, Daisy.
Thanks, Vijay. That was really, really interesting. I think kind of when you first look at what you're saying there, it doesn't feel particularly radical, but then when you're talking about the things that you're asking us to do, it really is. And there are a couple of things that kind of resonated with me, particularly kind of best practice can sometimes make you one of them. So why are we following best practice and seeking for that all the time? And data isn't just for the C-suite, and those sorts of things I haven't really heard in other places before. So thanks very much for sharing that with us. So over to our second speaker now, and that's Ivan.
Right, thank you, Daisy. Unlike Vijay, I learned things in a hard way. A self-taught guy from a village, a village boy, basically. So just a few days ago, somebody asked me a question. Ivan, when did you make your first dollar? So I was scratching my head, and to answer that question, I said I made my first dollar with a few boys at 7 years old in 1974. I was exploiting a loophole in the present-day ERP, which was called the Area License Scheme in a restricted zone, where a driver has to buy a $3 coupon just to get in. So I brought a bunch of, the ERP is like the UK low emission zone or the Italy ZTL. So it is that kind of system. So I gathered a bunch of and there's a carpooling system. So in order to beat the national system of $3, so I gathered a bunch of my kampong, which is village, local vernacular for village in Singapore, boys, Indian, regardless race, language, religion, I brought a bunch of boys there. So what we did was that we will be paid 50 cents and we'll split among each of us. That's how I made my first dollar in 1974. So coming back, this consortium of boys from my nearby villages, we built a healthy competition to avoid turf war, and also set a price structure for all our teams and how we ought to share the earnings. So it runs for a few good years, and it was obsolete because of the exploitation of the policies by a few boys. It was never acknowledged by the government of Singapore anyway. So coming back, I was unemployed at 9 years old. One day I go there and the police told me, go home, no longer working. So that was one of the saddest days of my life. So I learned something, the art of war, the Sun Tzu art of war then, was to life lesson of languages. I spoke the boys' languages, their cultures I learned. The policies that the government made has to be updated, and make friends, not enemies, and continuous learning. And also learn that a leader doesn't always know everything. So I was 9, I was unemployed then. So starting 10 years after that, I went on I watched Top Gun, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I went in, I signed on, and I became one. And I rose to the rank of flight commander. I was the youngest then, at 28. Always volunteered for the most difficult task. And I got assigned overseas, often alone, and and what many things that will fail, but thank God I always prevail, because my mindset was that I can only succeed and gain in experience. So because I have succeeded, friends become more confident in me. And as we grew up, they all became somebody, high net worth, business leaders, ministers, country leaders. I even share room with some ministers that in our younger days, in our dorms and our bunks. So they trusted what I can do. So, however, I got a bit disillusioned with my military life. Top Gun, flying a jet wasn't like a Top Gun movie. You don't slam the throttle like the show does, and you look really silly. You do that and you get beaten up because you crash the engine. So don't believe in Top Gun. Coming up next year. I left the military at the age of 30, and I worked my way up, turning business around. My last job was a CEO and executive director of Biolytics Limited, a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy when I came in. And within 9 months of my leadership, it became the first venture IPO in record time of 11 weeks in the Singapore Stock Exchange. And all my shares are on placement. There is no open share outside. The moment it went up, today it's trading 2.5 times what it came out. So I'm glad that happens. Yeah. So now come back to the literal dollar that I've learned. It's actually the lesson that I would like to share. Always prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So that's my life story. As a fighter pilot, we always train. We spend 90% of our time training for the 10% emergencies. A little bit excessive. But leaders can do fine things when everything goes fine. But what about it when it went wrong, just like COVID-19 now? So the test is stay agile, flexible, and responsive. Strive to do better always. There's a Chinese saying, you are as good as your last experience. Otherwise, you are old man talking about your wartime experience. The Chinese saying is, 好汉不说当年勇. So studying the culture of the market that we move into is very important. So before you move into the environment, adapt and learn their culture. You have to know the culture and deal with it before you build relationship actually, or anything. So you must think faster and better, or even more than the other. If you stop, people with muscles and resources will overtake you easily. You must always see beyond everybody. For example, the Chinese culture, sometimes you need to let the Chinese back down for face value. Or in India, you need to press on, have a few contracts level. They will sign the first contract and then bargain thereafter. So you prepare yourself for the backstops. So these are and rewrite the deals, you prepare to do that. I grew up in Singapore village, and with the story that I told you, I learned their language, I learned their culture, Indian, Malay, Hokkien, Teochew, Cantonese. I literally speak all of them. Sorry, the Indian is Tamil. So, and very multicultural. I've learned their languages, so I grew up knowing their traits. So that's how I make the best out of it. And I always use the context that I have. It is not it's not what you know, it's also who you know that brings you a long way. Knowing people helps a lot. 15 years ago in the US market, I did pretty well because I know a friend of mine from the Rotary Club of Singapore, of US, and his son was the deputy director of the Department of Homeland Security. So I know the culture because I was posted there in the 90s, and I sold them defense equipment. One of the biggest deals for my company, 167 million US dollars in 2004. Business has turned around the company. So, and I use my personal contacts again in China when I run an environmental project to a place where very near south of Wuhan, where they have nuclear testing in the early in the 50s or 60s, and it's actually a very bad site. And again, friends help me, to get that project. I know ASEAN, and I've been especially China, and I have a lot of contacts in China. I've been working there over 20 years, and for my last success in biolytics, I tie up a lab. It is a win-win situation. So we have 2 protocols of test for cancers. And I actually give them my machine for free, which is a liability in my account. By giving it to them, it's earning money, so I can get rid of the machine from the store. So I save on storage too. So these are various things that we need to look at. And we have new businesses and new product lines. And this product line actually helped me on my lab developed test and to clinical trial for Biolytics Limited, which was the basis of the IPO. And I fulfill what I promised when I first launched the IPO process. So, and also use what you have. Always turn your weakness into strength. That's what I did. There's a saying in Chinese, 换汤不换药. It's like you change the soup without changing the ingredients. You can change the taste of it, and it works differently. So when starting in Biolytics, I talked to all my colleagues and found that they are looking at the wrong market, the research-only market, which is a pathetic 3% market of the whole clinical world. So they had a good product, but wrong usage. But these guys know more stuff than me. Like I said, the leader doesn't need to know everything normally, but they need to know what to do. So I spoke with all my PhDs, which they have multiple PhDs, which I coin them as permanent head damage sometimes because I got very upset with their teaching. They can spend 3 hours teaching me science, and I only need 10 seconds to summarize it. So as a result of speaking to all these scientists, I am able to transform the company into a profit. And it's trading quite well today in the market, and I'm glad I did it that way. As a result of all this, in any stage, the company career, we need to understand the path we're going to take. And we also need to understand what the company needs. It is key to all the turnaround and success. And lastly, invest in your team. I love Formula One. I'm a petrol head. I love Formula One. Michael Schumacher can't win 7 championships without a good car that was designed by his engineers, the guy that changed his tires, the strategy, and so on. The CEO is only the driver, but no one talks about the team or the support members. I'm one man. I have a great team. A few have worked, some of my team members have worked with me for over 15 years, over 4 companies. And we work very closely together. Like Vijay said, I know their wedding anniversary, I know their children's birthday, and I will not hold them back when end of the day, I'll let them go early and finish my meeting and so that they can go back and join their family. So this is the way I work inside there. And everybody knows everybody's habit. So it's like back to the military again. All of us know our quirks, we do our job, and we have the synergy that the synergy for success. Example, I give you an example was that there was a high-level meeting in China, and I actually slighted and offended the VIP, which I don't know. It's bad news. It's total bad news in China. However, one of my team members actually put his hand on my shoulder and tapped me, and we understand. And I got to know it, and I came out and apologized, and we cut the deal because of that. So no man is an island. There's no one man or hero, but a team, just like any Formula One team. In fact, I wrote an article on that, which on the Chinese newspaper. So coming back on the Western and Eastern leadership, there's no one size fits all in my view. All leadership and management means different things in different cultures and situations. So you just have to adapt, like Vijay said. It's up to you to change and adapt to succeed. A great man said this before, leadership is a potent combination of strategy and character. But if you must be without one, be without strategy. So leadership is utmost important. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger, Desert Storm. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ivan. That was great. It sounds like authenticity and authentic leadership hasn't really been a choice that you've had to make in your life. Your personal experience has informed everything, whether that was making your first dollar or becoming a fighter pilot. You've obviously got a natural ability to understand and exploit a situation. and make friends with everyone, and that's taken you really far. Thanks for sharing those insights. That was great to hear. And Dessi, over to you.
Thank you, Daisy. So I was asked to share my experiences of working in business across Asia, America, and Europe, and just share some of my personal experiences, tips, and tools. Just very quickly, in terms of my background, I was born in Eritrea, which is in East Africa, and then spent the formative years of my life in the UK, and I've been based in Singapore for 7 years. So when I left London and to come to Singapore, I took it for granted that the norms that I had experienced in the UK, working in London, which is the hub for the financial and global markets, that I would be Asia ready. I felt that my experiences of being an African in the UK and having worked with many nationalities would also help me with that smooth transition. And let's not forget, even within the UK, we know you can find huge cultural and communication diversity between Londoners and Scousers and Geordies and Scots. So I was pretty confident that the transition would be smooth. Now, the 48 countries in Asia was really an amplification of that experience that I had in the UK, and some of my initial experiences in the first year of landing actually were quite challenging to me in terms of showing that leadership comparison between the East and the West. Now, just to give you guys a backdrop, my objective in moving to APAC was to expand our APAC business and to build local succession across our then 6 offices, now 16 offices, so that we were really an APAC business. The initial experiences that I had in my first year that sort of gave me pause for thought between the difference in the leadership styles was in negotiating deals, for example, in Japan, where my sales colleagues for my organization would suddenly start negotiating deals against me on behalf of the customer. I found that really frustrating. I was very confused by that behavior. I was making various value judgments in my mind. And also the conduct of negotiations and meetings in places like Japan, where I wasn't used to and didn't quite understand the silence in those sessions. And then last but not least, the difference between my time sensitivity coming from the UK, where once the key terms of a deal had been agreed and the parties had shaken hands to move forward, that, you know, in my experience in London for the last 20 years, that tended to move very swiftly and quickly. And then experiencing in Asia, where actually that time sensitivity wasn't the same as my previous experience. And all of that led me to feel slightly frustrated, sometimes annoyed, sometimes confused, and not quite understanding what the paradigm was. So what did I learn? I learned a lot around cultural intelligence, and that's for me now is a critical third vector of what I need and leaders in my organization are formally and informally exposed to around IQ, EQ, and CIQ. I've gained a much better understanding of the key communication differences between leadership styles in the West and the East. And I've adapted my tone, my listening, and my actions to the cultural context of each country that we operate in. As Ivan said, there is no one size fits all. And so when we talk about Asia as one homogenous zone, we're already way off. And so when we're looking at countries and how we do business with partners, with customers, and in the way that we're nurturing the talent of our local employees, we are very much looking at a domestic strategy, because there really is no one size fits all here. I will give you a recommendation. One of the formal learnings that I went on in my 7-year journey was led by a trainer that we have here in Singapore. Her name is Dr. Susanna Tugli. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, or I'll provide the details to BritCham. What Dr. Tugli does is really look at the East beats West differences between direct and indirect communication. That was very valuable to me, because in the initial years, I didn't always understand when yes would actually mean no from both colleagues and customers. And so really understanding how that plays out between the various countries that we have in Asia is critical. And I remember one of the first experiences I had, I was leading an APAC-wide team call. I was asking for contributions towards the project that we were driving forward. There were very few contributions from a number of the countries, and so that led me to think that they were all in agreement with the direction that we were moving in. And actually, to my surprise, when I later was in discussions with individuals or other members of the team that had got wind of this project, I found that actually there wasn't consensus. It was just that that meeting wasn't going to be where I would hear the truth or the feedback that I was looking for. Equally, Dr. Tigley talks about time sensitivity and being comfortable with silences and communication patterns, and that's something that I don't underestimate the value of. As a Westerner, I am very comfortable with sequential communication style. If I am talking with another person and we're speaking over one another, it's very comfortable and we're still listening. However, with colleagues, customers, and partners in certain parts of Asia, that was not the communication style to adopt, and actually could be perceived as being rude or abrupt. And again, just really understanding that silence in the communication pattern. What else have I learned? I've learned humility. I always thought that growing up as an African in the UK, I was cognizant of being a guest in another country, but I had brought some of my own biases to Asia. And so really understanding that even if I am the domain expert coming with knowledge and competencies from the UK, that actually I was very much a student and a learner when it comes to selling into Vietnam, hosting meetings in Japan, understanding the local domestic China markets, and acknowledging that there is a difference on perspectives on things like trust and how people establish it, risk, appetites, and hierarchy. And that the world was very different in the eyes of everyone in the room, and being aware of that. So when pushing to close deals in certain jurisdictions, having the humility to understand where people are in the room were coming from, I was less confused about the behaviors that I was seeing. I love to travel. I'm very curious about other cultures. But I think it really helped me pave fantastic relationships with both the colleagues that I manage in Singapore. We have just under 300 people from 21 countries represented here, but we have around 3,000 across the region. That curiosity and openness, and showing people that you come with good intention, and you come seeking to understand more than you are seeking to be understood. And that was a pivot for me that really made a big difference. One of the practical ways that we've instituted that for our leadership team in Singapore and across the region is that we will have reverse mentors. And that will give leaders a much better exposure to local culture and understanding local culture. That also overcomes another issue that I'm going to touch on in a minute. We also then initiated office culture clubs. So we asked our Japanese and Korean and Chinese and Indian colleagues in the Singapore office to host events in the office where they would teach and share the traditions and etiquettes and protocols of their country, both in the business context and the personal context. And what that did is that helped everybody understand that you can cause offense, for example, in Japan, if you're not seated at the business table. I think most people know that, because you'll probably be told that before you're taken into a meeting in Japan. But you may not also be aware that there's an etiquette to hierarchy on an elevator or an escalator or in a taxi, and just learning all of those nuances and how you can cause misunderstanding and offense. Those events have continued for a number of years now because they've been so popular, and they've actually helped to bring our colleagues together, and to Vijay's point, bring a stronger employee voice to the way that we look at our cross-culture leadership. Now, when I talk about this with some people back home, the response I get sometimes is, you know, that sounds like a minefield. You know, do you feel like you're always on your tiptoes? I would say not at all. I think one of the positive experiences of working in Asia is that they are awesome hosts and are very open to sharing etiquette protocols and having our presence and our skills here. It's really that show of good intention and grace that I think everybody just needs to have. And I think you all mentioned earlier, authenticity being really, really important. I'm not sure how many minutes I've got left, but I'll be very quick on the last 3 points. Being sensitive and self-aware and understanding of local culture. I think Ivan touched on that. I would say that it's sometimes as simple as knowing which topics are taboo. So watching your criticism, whether it's verbalized or in your mind and driving your action, of throwaway remarks about countries, you know, about corruption or the infrastructure or the backward nature of certain gender roles. These offhand remarks, even if they're not meant to cause offense, can really put people's back up and cause hurt and misunderstanding and alienate your audience. Character and trust is one thing that is very important for my culture in Africa, but I've found it again to be really prominent in the Asian markets in terms of the contrast between leadership styles. The building of trust happens as much outside of the office as much as it does inside the office, particularly if your senior and junior colleagues are not able to skip over their managers to access you. Is really creating those social events, whether it's tennis or running. I know at the moment we're constrained with COVID-19, but really the importance of creating those channels for that stronger employee voice to access the leadership, and always understanding that hierarchy will contain the way that you operate in Asia in a way that you may not be constrained in the UK. And so working around that by skip level conversations, by asking colleagues directly outside of a group context for their input. So those are just my sharings. I'm sorry if I was too quick through that, but happy to answer any questions.
That was great. Thank you very much. Some really practical insights, I think, particularly if we've got people who are relatively new here, or even who've been here for a long time but operating in a slightly different context. I think, as you say, sometimes that freedom with speech and without thinking things can cause you to you know, cause offence without necessarily having intended to do so. And I think you've given some really kind of good things for me, and I'm sure others who are on the call, to think about there. Thank you for being so honest about the things that have happened to you over your years here. So it's time for us to go into the question and answer session, everyone. So we've got 15 minutes or so to be able to do that. So please do feed in your questions. We've had a few already that I can start with, but please do feed in more as they come in. So we've got first question for Vijay. On what does inclusive leadership look like in an Asian context?
Okay, so thank you, Daisy, for the question. So inclusive leadership, you know, is part of authentic practices, and as Dessi affirmed that as well, I think employees' voice is becoming more critical now. And as Ivan said, leaders don't have all the answers. So where the answers lies is with the wisdom of the organization. And inclusive leadership is about, first of all, is about acknowledging that there are different perspectives, there are different ideas, there are different ways of doing things. And where this comes perhaps from cultural background, social background, different generations. You can be in this homogeneous Japanese culture, but if you have different generations working in a workforce, that needs to have inclusive practices so that every voices can come in. So for global leadership, we cannot operate without being inclusive. And this is where the paradigm has changed. So the initial paradigm of companies going global is because they want to save costs, resource. There's a raw material, cheaper labor costs, and that was the major paradigm for companies to go global. But that doesn't exist anymore. Because if companies operate on that mindset, they are not getting the wisdom of the local that can leverage their regional presence. So I feel for global leadership, you can't do it without being inclusive.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so we've got one here. I'm not sure if anyone in particular has experience with the millennial workforce. How should I better prepare myself to lead the new millennial workforce in Asia? Does anybody want to take that one? Ivan, was that your hand saying, yes, I think I've got something to share?
Okay, I call the millennium the corals. Water cannot be too deep, too shallow, too much, too strong, too little, too much oxygen, too little oxygen and food and so on, and they will die. You need to be protected. However, I learned one thing about the millennium that I had worked with in shore. We have 40 of them, and you have to build the camaraderie between them so that they know that if they fall sick, for example, they come to work. They may not be sick, but they just wanted to take the leave. So force them in working with a camaraderie that they will have to. I don't want to fail my next guy. Just like me, by instilling the group matrix, so that they have this peer pressure to stay together and actually move forward with your agenda. How do you put forward the agenda is basically as a leader, you need to love your people, treat them well, be nice to them. I never fail a day. Every morning, I will check the list of people's birthday and I'll call them. I will send a message to them, whether are they working with me or not, are they in Singapore or anywhere else in the world. I'll make it a point that I do that, even their anniversary. So, and their children and so on, or even their boyfriends, if I know their birthday. So these are things that we with millennials, it's a personality. You need to create, as a leader, you need to have the personality to work with the people and force them to work together. And then they will actually deliver miracles, actually, the millennials.
Yeah, that's a lovely personal touch, kind of giving them a call on their birthdays and stuff. I think I've got about 135 people in APAC, so I think I could fit that in as long as they're evenly spaced around the year. So we've got a question for everyone on the panel here. So maybe Dessi, if we start with you, on a general level, and this one, give an honest answer. Where do the panel think Westerners go wrong in leading teams within Asia?
I think we risk getting it wrong, and often do, by bringing our baggage with us and thinking that what worked and what is and what happens where we came from is the best thing for where we are in Asia. And I think Vijay touched on this at the beginning about the world has exported, or the West has exported a lot of its achievements to Asia, but what is Asia contributing to the table? And the answer is a lot. And actually what we see in our business is a lot of innovation being driven by Asia that we're exporting to New York and London. But if you come with that baggage and mindset that I'm now going to teach them all how to do it properly, or at least that's informing some part of your mindset, and that when you see differences, you identify those differences as being wrong or odd, then, and your actions then are informed by that mindset, we alienate our audience, and we're on a hiding to nothing.
Yeah, and I think some of those points have been resonated in the conversations that the world is having at the moment around kind of race and colonialism, and we all need to kind of question what is it that makes us think what is right and wrong in context in the world. So big questions. Vijay, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'd like to echo Daisy as well and build on Daisy's perspective as well. So all of us have cultural baggages, and we do it unconsciously, unfortunately. But being aware, I think that is the first step. Now, if you are a Western leader managing a team in Asia, I think rather than see whether things go wrong, think about the possibility going to a higher level of leadership. So which is traditionally, what leaders have been doing is that they go to China, they brought HQ model there. That's the first, in 1960s, 1970s. And 1980s, 1990s, a lot of localization, customization. They go there and try to be a better Chinese, but unfortunately they can't. So that is not the goal of global leadership. The global leadership is not about going to the Rome and be a Roman. That is not global leadership. Global leadership is about going to China, bring your baggage with you, because there are some strengths with it, but there's also strength with your Chinese local part there. Try to integrate and see what higher level leadership you can provide. I think that is what is missing now in the global leadership environment. We have seen many books, do and don'ts. That is for tourists. That is for people who are going to China for 3 months assignment, but not for 2-3 years. So I think there's a lot of things that we can learn by integrating East and West.
Ivan, have you seen any things to avoid?
I lived in 12 countries and in 29 years.
You're a bit quiet, Ivan, as your headset.
Okay, I have traveled 99 countries.
I still can't hear you very well.
You can't hear me? Can you? I think maybe the...
Ivan, if you could disconnect your headset, that might help.
Okay. I have gone to 99 countries.
Right.
I lived in 12 of them for the last 29 years. So what was so special about all this is that I basically grew the culture there. Grew to love the culture there and learn the culture. It gave me time. So as a global leader, I feel that what is missing is we like to tell people our baggages. So instead, you need to find, either you find a good character that able to bridge the differences, or you yourself as a leader, you bridge that difference. You know the difference between the two areas. For example, in China, even China, you need to know which region you are in. And each of the region behave differently and eat different stuff. So it's like a whole Europe. You can't say you know China. I know pretty well, but I know certain do's and don'ts, but I can't say I know every part of China. So the point I'm trying to draw is either you be the leader that bridge it, or someone bridge the leadership. That's what I feel. And you need to understand the local culture, even to the which part of China behaves differently. Vietnamese have a different behavior, and Korean have a different behavior. In fact, I sorted out a Korean riot in my company in Vietnam. So what happened was the Korean guy, a manager, was upset with the supervisor, and he smacked on his shoulder, and it went down the rank. And the last guy is a Vietnamese, and they had a riot. But it is different in culture. So you, as a leader, you need to understand and prevent such things from happening. And you must be the bridge, or the bridge, or the manager that on the ground is the bridge. So that person has to be exposed to various cultures. If not, you have to do it. I'm a tactical guy, less strategy on that sense. So I'm the doer, basically. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
And now we have one. Leading can be exhausting. How do you stay motivated? Any thoughts? Would anyone like to answer that one? We've heard a lot of things about kind of the maybe old or more Western leadership style was this is me, that's what I'm bringing, this is the right, this is the wrong. But we've talked about localism and having to understand things and research areas before we go in them, and try and kind of not assimilate but get to know things rather than say everyone should be like me. That takes a lot of time and energy and things to do. How do you keep that energy going? Dessi or Vijay?
Sure, I'm happy to share. Leading is exhausting wherever you're doing it in the world, and some days I do miss being the single contributor, individual contributor, but actually in reality, and I think purpose came up in Vijay's poll. for me, this opportunity to lead and pass on what I have learned and help others and bring others along and help them realize their potential is my purpose. And it gives me a much deeper return on the job that I'm doing. And if I was just a lawyer for 40, 50 years, turning transactions and doing deals, I'm not really sure that that would be so fulfilling. But really tapping into these issues that we've covered today, and whether it's helping millennials or peers and building a succession group across Asia Pacific, I feel in some way that that will be part of my personal legacy.
I just want to add, I think one of the poll that came out is also listening. Now, listening is also exhaustive, right? We have to push ourselves to listen, and that is a big part of leadership. And I think it's part of whether inclusive leadership or global leadership. It comes to listening as well as questioning. So that two goes together, and it requires a lot of energy to do both effectively. But what I've heard, from a conversation with business leaders in this region, is that is an investment, because if leaders do that right, that investment will give very high return in the future. So some of the ROI of having that is psychological safety, trust. I think Dessi mentioned that it's critical at this era. So part of that global leadership has to incorporate all this and see that as an investment rather than as a stressful period or stressful challenges. So that would be, I think, one tip that leaders can take away.
Great, thanks. And then Ivan, we had a question for you, but did you want to add on an answer to that one first?
All right. I think I'll add on to answer this is I will listen. I don't find leadership exhaustive. I actually love it, enjoyed it, because it's up to you to take pace, and the people that you dealt with enjoy your work. I don't take up jobs that I don't enjoy. If I choose my boss too. If I think my boss is not someone I could work with, I walked out, and I did. I worked out on a very big company on the first day of job. So I choose my boss. So I enjoy my work. I enjoy the people around me, and you need to take pace. Take pace in the sense where enjoy yourself when you travel. Enjoy the culture. Enjoy the environment. Talking about listening, I listen. I do listen a lot, but I need to know discerning is also very important, because everyone will start talking to you. I worked in India, in Hyderabad. Every other day, someone come and speak with you and complain about something. So it's also cultural, and also depends on, you need to listen to them, but then you need to be discerning what they're talking about. So so discerning, listening is important. You just have to enjoy your work. If you don't, then quit the job. That's me. Sorry, the next question, please.
That segues quite nicely into our next question. I thought we've got quite a hard question here, and I was like, I bet Ivan's got some experience that he can share for this one, which was how can you still lead according to your values in this tough environment when you're having to let people go?
Okay. Oh, I experienced this about 10 over years ago, and I was only a international manager. I was supposed to let go 50 people in Thailand, and somebody actually pulled a gun and put on a table, and he said, "You fire me." And he had a gun in front of me, and I'm quite sure it was loaded. So what do? So you just have to take your pace and just answer them accordingly. I said, "Today you are going. I did what I could for you. But if I do not know who's going to do that for me," that happened to me in Thailand. Try to somebody pulling a gun at you and ask you to fire him. I do not know how you react, but that's how I reacted. So I guess if you are truthful to people, they know you have been like that, and you behave the way you said you are, they know that you have done enough for them. So it was a pretty long conversation, actually. I was asking him what's wrong with his family and so on. He took his paycheck, put his gun back into his holster, and he walked out. So that was my experience. And yeah, true and behold, I left the company in 1999. So that's how it was.
Well, I'm glad that you survived the experience and you've been able to come here today, and it makes sense why you can thrive in high pressure situations now. That's a pretty high pressure one. Okay, so Vijay, maybe this one for you. We're now working remotely and talking to people globally over digital platforms. Do you think this removes many cultural barriers? Are we now all speaking the same new language? And this links to a question that we had from somebody else around maybe opportunities that we're seeing through this kind of new ways of working in COVID.
Okay, I would say, COVID-19 situation, has raised a lot of challenges, but there are some opportunities as well in terms of global leadership. People were very skeptical. Even this webinar now, what we are having, 30 over people are participating in it. We are having a discussion. If we have done this 5 years ago, I don't think we will be very successful of doing this. So I think it needs some time to change this. Now, for teams that are working globally in a virtual environment, there are many tools now that can simulate the face-to-face kind of interaction. The only thing that you won't have is face-to-face distancing. But a lot of things, we can do it online virtually. There's a lot of third-party app that you can bring in. Polling is one example, and so many things. So I would say we are probably converging to a similar language for virtual. Now, that only will happen if there's a higher level of trust. How does the trust develops? It's very different when you have face-to-face environment versus virtual. So it's harder actually for leaders to develop the trust virtually, but it could be done. And probably, we'll be learning from it. It's not a straightforward answer, but I think it does not derail us from building global leadership capabilities in a team just because, we don't have face-to-face. If we can have a hybrid, that'll be better. But if we don't have options, I think we have to just find ways how to make this better. So I think many organizations are still experimenting this, and the success rate for learning and development space is actually quite good in terms of delivering virtually and so on.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I've definitely in my role, as you say, in learning and development, and now that everyone's been forced to go onto these new platforms, such as Teams and Zoom, that people have acclimatized to, that I'm actually seeing much more honesty and trust on calls than I ever perhaps did see in the training classroom and those environments where it was just taken as a given that the quieter people wouldn't contribute really. Whereas on these calls, I think it's a much more kind of trusting, open environment in some ways, but it has taken us a few months to kind of relearn how to do that. Okay, so we've got another question here. What do we need to develop in Asian leaders to better connect with global leadership in international firms? So it sounds like this one might be related to some of the advice that we've been given about what those international firm leaders should be. But any tips for someone who's not really flexing around that situation? Perhaps Dessi, would you like to start?
Sure, I might actually flip this one the other way around. I think the benefit of having people like me and a number of other colleagues that came over from New York and London many years ago was to understand the local challenges. And what we learned was that global needed to be trained on how to appreciate the opportunities in APAC and understand the opportunities in APAC. So that education was for our global leaders. And to the point made in response to the question about now that we're all on digital platforms, does this remove cultural barriers? It may actually impede in the medium to long term if we're not able to reinstate travel, that education that we were doing for our global counterparts. So, nothing really helped as much as bringing our global counterparts to China or to Japan or to Indonesia or to Vietnam and really showing them the local opportunities and breaking bread with partners and customers and really understanding what the local context looked like and felt like. Having said all of that, what we're doing to develop our leaders in Asia is to expose them to both external and internal training and development, but also to give them visibility platforms to global leaders within our organization. So making sure that just because of their situation in APAC, their physical location in APAC, that they don't become out of sight, out of mind to our exec and our senior management in London and New York, and really giving them that visibility platform.
Daisy, I just want to add to that as well, because this is a question that the HCLI is looking now, and we are doing research on it. So basically the question is, what do we need to develop in Asia to better connect with global leadership international firms? And I like Daisy's response. You need to flip it over how the global executives can better connect with Asia. But we're also looking into the aspect is, what is global leadership framework for that organization? What informs the succession, the talent pipeline, the hiring, the development of leaders? That itself may be biased towards a model that is more to HQ centric. Now, this is not only for Western firms, but for any firms from any part of the world that are going to global. They tend to bring their baggage of HQ centric. For example, Japanese organizations going outside Japan. You still see many Japanese leaders in those organizations, not enough local at the C level. And that is because of the cultural baggage they have that informs the competencies, capabilities required. So we are looking into this, hopefully in the next 6 or 9 months, we will have some insights from that study. Happy to share with BritCham. By the way, the HC PRISM, we are happy to give the link and participants can download the report as well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, all. We're in our last few minutes. I was just wondering if anybody kind of had something that they'd like to share before we close the session. Ivan, hand raised.
There was a question somebody asked me about China. I thought I saw the Q&A. I just have a quick wrap up on that. First, you need to know what you're selling. Don't bring coal to Newcastle. And often people say, I want to sell this to China. So the next thing, that's the first thing you need to know. And second thing is that you need to know the people. There's no one size fits all model. You need to do your SWOT and how to overcome it. SWOT is easy, but then again, there are times you do not know the culture, you will fall into the trap of your own SWOT. So you need to get somebody who have very good local knowledge. And that includes people who are local, may not know their local knowledge. And that's the problem. There's 1.4 billion Chinese, and not all of them know the business culture. I give you an example. I had a, like Daisy says, sitting arrangement of the table of precedence is an English term, yeah? Table of precedence. Many of them do not know how to sit on the table. Who sits where? And the guy with the back facing the door is actually the guy who paid the money for the dinner. As simple as that. And who is the VIP? And who is the second guy and third guy? And who is the co-host? All these table of precedence, many of the Chinese may not know. So you really, really need to look for a right person or an organization, and you discern who is the one that is telling you the truth. Go down to the ground and see it. And going down the ground and see it, they may even tell you that the place is there. I have friends who told me they want to buy a factory, and they said that they go down and do a on-site check. Yeah, they walk around the factory like he's the owner, but actually he just managed to get a free pass that day. So be discerning, yeah. So it's very difficult to say, unless I know your business, how you do your business. But first is, whether are you bringing coal to Newcastle first? The Chinese only accept things that they want. They are very particular now. They literally produce anything, everything. So yeah, you need to know, are you inside that particular package of things they want? If not, then don't waste your time. Yeah.
Thanks. And sorry to everyone who asked questions that we haven't had time to get to today. We've just run out of time, but thanks so much for coming, and thank you all the speakers for these really valuable insights that you've shared with us. We really appreciate it. I think we've got a few chamber events coming up. If you'd like to join us at one of those, we've got them on the slide at the moment. I hope you've enjoyed today. If so, please do come along to one of our other ones. And of course, we will have an event feedback survey email coming round to you. Please, can you make sure that you fill it in? We want to make sure that we are running the right types of events for you, our listeners. Thanks very much, everyone. Other than that, I'll bring today to a close.